Okay, so for part three, you're evaluating the tone, okay, for critical thinking. These tone words are extremely important. So you might want to take out your cell phones at this time because this information will go away once this class is over. Take a picture of the following words because, again, these words are not only going to be on your final exam or midterm, but you will also see them in like Comp 1 or in other classes, okay? These are collegiate, college level words. Now, definition of tone. Which out of these four choices really depicts the meaning of tone? Well, you should have selected A, okay? It is the attitude or feeling a writer expresses. It's not what you get from the text, it's what the author is saying within the text based off of the key words. It's all about the key words in the text. How do you identify bias? Now, mind you, they all connect. So tone and bias connects. So you're going to see that kind of correlation or connectedness between the two. So when you are identifying the author's bias, okay, it's based on the author's viewpoint or opinion, his or her prejudice, okay, based on a particular topic. All right, it's also a controversial, issue, in terms of whatever topic they're addressing as well. Okay, so for some news reporters, they tend to use some kind of bias. Also, news stations such as MNBC, right? They tend to use that. Fox, for instance, also kind of shows their bias. They pretty much identify or show their prejudice in some way, shape, or form. Okay, so those are some great examples to help you in terms of identifying bias when it comes to providing factual information. All right. Of course, we have our own bias, but in terms of using facts and embedding bias within those facts, news stations tend to be a very good example. Now, when you're trying to identify the bias of a particular text, look at the connotative meaning, and we'll learn more about that very shortly in terms of what that entails. Look at the descriptive language, aka adjectives, right? For instance, okay? Analyzing the tone. So like I told you before, tone and bias connects. And then look for opposing viewpoints. All right, so take some time to look at the choices, identify which statement reveals some form of bias. Pause the video to read all the choices. You should have selected number 1 and number 3, okay? And again, these keywords in number 1, for instance, harmful, shows a bias because it is an adjective. He is describing, or she, the author, is describing the effects, right? So an adjective describes a person, place, or thing. In other words, a noun of some sort. So they're talking about the effects in this case. For number 3, they're talking about delightful, romantic, right, in terms of the comedies, right? So those keywords are also red flags that will help to identify the bias. Now for number 2, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam share a common belief in an all-powerful creator. You can research this in terms of the text that they use, Bibles or what have you, in terms of the literature, and you will be able to identify that, right? So therefore, that statement is factual. Now, which of the following is not a guideline for identifying bias? Hint, this might be on Monday's test. You should have answered B, okay? Look for similar viewpoints, okay? When you are looking at bias, the answer or the examples from the breakdown is really looking at opposing viewpoints, okay? That is what was indicated in terms of identifying bias overall. Evaluating data and evidence. Again, this all connects to bias, tone, okay? There's a strong connection, fact and opinion as well. So when I told you about the author's argument or point statement that he or she is making, you need to look at the supporting evidence that the author uses, okay? So it's important that when you're identifying the evidence he or she is using within their text, look at the types of evidence to determine if the author is providing a supportive evidence for their claim, for their statement, okay? So personal experience, statistical data, historical documentation, those are the things that you need to reflect on and remember in terms of whether or not the evidence is valid, whether or not the evidence is relevant. Take some time to review. This is important. Okay. Now, which is considered a task of a critical thinker? Stop the video to read the choices and select the best answer. Very good. So like I told you in class, it's important to weigh and evaluate the quality of evidence, okay? So not always say, yes, of course, I agree with the author. No, you don't want to do that all the time. You want to say, you know what, I think there might be a better approach. That is what a critical thinker does, or a critical reader. Cognitive language. Cognitive language is the following. It's something that is implied, a nuance, words that take on another kind of level of meaning, all right? It's implied in some way in terms of being positive or negative, okay? So when you think about mobs and gangs, they both have the same kind of negative connotation based on this example. But when you think about crowd, for instance, crowd is more positive versus mobs and gangs. They all kind of mean like the same thing in terms of group, but one is really more disorganized than the other. So mobs and gangs are more disorganized than a crowd. Look at the following choices to identify the positive connotation within numbers 1 to 5. So look at the two choices for number 1, the same goes for number 2, and so on. You should have selected request. Can you imagine someone saying, I demand you to give me this? That's negative connotation, okay? But request is more positive, right? Okay. Let's look at number 5 in terms of garment versus gown, because some people are like, what's a garment? Well, a gown is something that you tend to see at the Oscars or the Grammys or the BET Awards. Hopefully some women wear gowns. But you tend to see that when it comes to shows, right? Or award ceremonies. Garment is just something that's very negative in terms of it can be a rag or just some kind of worn out material. Okay. Which of the following represents the levels of word meanings? Okay, so you should have selected B, denotations and connotations. So we talked about connotations, but denotations are dictionary literal words, okay? They're just straightforward, and that is what denotations mean, D and D. Remember this. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, again, remember that you have the following videos to watch, and I'll be giving an announcement very shortly.